Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 574 Sports Report. I'm your host, Drew Clauder, and with me we have some high-profile characters with John Overmyer and Kenny Peterson. We are going over the NIC Conference this episode. So before I throw it over to you guys, first I want to thank our sponsors, May Oberfell Lorbers, Attorneys at Law, Carge Chiropractic Wellness Center, Barnaby's on Jefferson, Lake Lightner Door, and Digsy Dogs and Grill. Now we'll take a quick peek at last season in the NIC. Last season, Penn won the conference at 7-0 overall, 11-1 overall, 7-0 in conference, excuse me. Me and John did the Penn St. Joe game at the end of the season. St. Joe loses that game. They go 6-1 in conference, 12-2 overall. You follow that up with Elkhart, Adams, New Prairie, South Bend Riley, South Bend Washington, and Mishawaka Marian ending the conference. And Kenny, I'll throw it to you first. You saw the New Prairie Cougars as the voice of New Prairie Cougars, so you saw each of these teams throughout the season. What was your overall sense overview of the NIC conference last season?
Well, obviously, I think you have to start with Penn. Penn will always be the standard bearer in this league. And, you know, if you're going to win the NIC, you're going to have to somehow find a way to get by Penn. And they will always be the one that will be the standard. I thought, guys, the team that really stood out to me last year that gave Penn, I think, maybe its best game in the conference was St. Joe. I mean, I think the job that Ben Downey is doing right now, they're building something over there, and they're slowly closing the gap on Penn, I think. And I'm just going over some of my stats from last year when New Prairie played St. Joe. I mean, you look at the Huskies from that game last year. Ben Downey is building something over there. He is building something really good, and with what they've got coming back this year, I think St. Joe's going to be the one that, if there's a team in the IC that's going to challenge Penn or try to get to that level, it's going to be St. Joe, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Kenny. I think if we look back at 2025, Elkhart was good, but it was Penn and St. Joe. They were kind of the top two teams. There was a lot of buildup, and Drew, as you know, we did that game at Father Bly Field, standing room only that night. Great atmosphere, great weather, and that score was not indicative of how that game went. I think Penn walked out of there. Yeah, they walked out with the W, but I think they walked out realizing, wow, we got lucky here, because they went toe-to-toe with the Kingsmen. And, yeah, it goes through Penn. And you look at the NIC in most sports, and you look at football, you look at girls basketball. Where do you go? You go through the Kingsmen to try to win a conference title. New Prairie has been able to do that. Not anybody else really has. And I think St. Joe is making the strides. And when St. Joe started with a quarterback situation last year where they had two guys who had starts, Sam Chicatino, who had started for St. Joe, and then Gooby, who transferred from Adams to St. Joe. He ended up being the starter for the first couple of weeks and was not as effective on offense as I think Ben Downey wanted him to see, so they shifted to Chicatino, and look what he did. He took them to a conference runner-up. They won a sectional title in a very tough sectional that had a good Northwood and good Mishawaka team in it, and then beat Hobart, by golly, in the regional, and then they take Fort Wayne Dwenger down to the wire in the semi-state within one or two plays of playing at Lucas Oil. That just really tells you what Ben Downey and his staff has done. And I think especially defensively for St. Joe, when you look at their defense, up front is always good with the black shirts, but that defensive secondary, which has been very susceptible for the last several years, really turned it up a notch because he brought back his defensive backs coach in Trevor Dokes. And Trevor is so passionate about defensive backs. He was on that 95 state championship team with Ben, so they were classmates, they were teammates, they're good friends, and he is so passionate on how to teach to play defensive back. They have really improved in that area, and I will tell you, anybody on St. Joe's schedule this year better look out, because they're going to have to scrap it up against a very, very feisty bunch of Huskies in 2026.
I agree with everything you guys said. Penn is kind of the benchmark for the NIC. They are the staple. They're the top dog. They're what everyone aspires to be. And we've seen New Prairie do it. Elkhart's been feisty here and there. But that St. Joe squad last year showed a lot of heart, surprised a lot of people. We know Ben Downey, obviously, so it wasn't as much of a surprise to us seeing what he was able to do. But outside of St. Joe, I think you did see a lot of surprised people when, throughout the season, St. Joe just kept getting better and better and better. And then all of a sudden, end of the season, it's for a conference championship on that final week before sectionals. Taking a quick look at season leaders, you have Micah Jarrell for Elkhart, 1,644 passing yards. Kenny, you saw Reed Robinson from New Prairie run all over the field with 1,458 yards on the ground.
Yep.
Jaden Lineberry for South Bend, Washington, 1,248 yards receiving. Reed Robinson led the way with touchdowns at 22. Bryce Verse for South Bend, Washington had 125 tackles to lead the conference. Then you have a couple of Huskies and Charles Grew lead the way with 9 sacks, and James Crenedy lead the way with 8 interceptions. So that's kind of a last year overlook of the conference. We'll get into each individual team this year. We have a little bit of a different format. Obviously, you see two of the three of us. I don't remember yet, so we are working on that as of now. But little different way. We're trying different ways to do this podcast, see what works best. And so we'll go over each team. We'll each kind of give our takes and everything. And then at the end of the podcast, we'll each kind of give predictions, I think is how this is going to run. So first overview is going to be the conference champion, the Penn Kingsmen. They went 11-1 overall, 7-0 in conference. They lost in the regionals last year to Carroll, 41-30. You look, they scored 490 points, averaged 41 points a game. They gave up 152 points, giving up 12.7 points per game. You look at last year's schedule, they were undefeated until their loss to Carroll, and Valpo was close at 21-13, Mishawaka 28-22. But after that, as they got into conference play, they just ran over everybody, including that St. Joe game. But as me and you know, John, it was a battle in the first half. St. Joe just didn't have enough gas in the second half to keep up with Penn.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They really did a good job in that first half, keeping that Penn offense down. But I think the physicality of Penn took its toll on St. Joe there in the second half. So, I think it's one of those things that that'll be adjusted to, and conditioning is a part of that. And of course, by week 9, you're bumped, you're bruised, everything else. And I think St. Joe, even though they wanted to win that was a great time to play that game, because that could really show them, okay, we're ready to play in the tournament. And as you know, with St. Joe in the sectional they play Mishawaka. They're going to play, some of these, the Northwoods. And, Northridge is always, they had a down year last year. Now they've got a new coach. We'll see what they bring this year. But I really, really think that with Penn, it's still Penn. And until somebody can go out there and show me they can beat Penn, Penn is still going to be the class of the NIC. And that always has brought up that debate about, well, why is Penn playing in the NIC? It does not help them come postseason time. Well, unless somebody can make Penn a better offer, and I know the Northern Lakes will not take Penn. They don't want Penn, and for obviously reasons. And I think that they don't want to go to the Duneland because of the time difference. You talk to some of the people at Penn, and football is not a problem because that's on a Friday night. So that's no big deal. But if you're sending the girls basketball team over there on a Tuesday to play a Michigan City or even a Lake Central or Crown Point, and you're playing a 7:30, let's say a 7:30 Eastern game or even 8 o'clock Eastern game, these kids aren't going to get home much till after midnight, and then you expect them to be in school the next morning. That's been some of the discussions. But I think with the NIC, it's going to be Penn. And if somebody can beat Penn, the more power to them. Are there some contenders? Absolutely, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I think as long as Penn continues to rebuild and reload every year, Brian Whitten, the former St. Joe coach, is now on the defensive staff at Penn. He's done a good job with that defensive team, with that Wild Bunch defense. I really think that, they're going to be some way that they're not going to lose the conference unless they would have a catastrophe with injuries or something like that. But I think Penn will be the cream of the crop.
You look at this schedule upcoming, they're home for Valpo, then they're at Mishawaka for the backyard brawl, at South Bend Riley to start conference play. They get Washington and Marian at home, at Adams, Elkhart at home, at New Prairie, St. Joe at home. So, Kenny, you look at this schedule, Valparaiso, which I understand isn't a conference game, Elkhart and St. Joe, they're three big games other than the backyard brawl. That is completely different. Home or away, that's different. But they're big three games all at home. That's huge for Penn.
It's huge for Penn. Week 2 is always going to be the game where you really got, if you're a Penn fan, you hold your breath because you're playing Mishawaka, you're playing the option, and we've seen the success that Mishawaka has had through the years against Penn running that triple option style offense. And you really, if you think you're going to be able to slow them down in 4 days, you're crazy because that ain't going to happen. And if you're Penn, you want to spend all off season, just like Notre Dame does when they play the Naval Academy. You've got to devote a lot of your preseason practice, not the whole practice, but a good 20 to 25 minutes of just seeing option football, because we've seen over the years how many times Mishawaka has sliced that Penn defense with the option because Penn will over pursue, and next thing you know, it's 70 yards to the house. So that one is one of those games that Penn's got to really be ready for. And then with Valpo, Valpo has always had great athletes. They've really, Marshall's done a really great job running that football program over at Valparaiso. And, the first 2 games are going to be the challenging part for Penn, and then St. Joe. But you realistically look at the NIC, other than St. Joe, I don't know who challenges Penn right now. And until somebody does challenge Penn, it's going to be Penn versus the house.
Especially with those 3 games at home, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they got a very favorable schedule for them this year. They're unfortunately no stats for Penn, so don't know what they're losing. We do know a couple players they're losing. They're losing a couple key defensive players. And I do believe they lose their quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. So they do get a couple key games at home, as we say. Starting with Valparaiso is tough. As we said, Mishawaka is always going to be tough. But then you go Riley, Washington, Marian. 3 teams that were 8-7-6 in the order for the season. So they do have some ramp-up time before they get to Elkhart, before they get to St. Joe. Obviously, they have New Prairie at New Prairie before that St. Joe game. So they have a favorable schedule, I think we would all agree, with the home-away splits.
Yes.
So with that being said, with no stats for Penn, we move now on to the St. Joe Huskies. They were 12-2 overall last year, 6-1 in the conference, second in the conference. They lost in the semi-state, as you said, to Fort Wayne Bishop Dwenger, 28-7. They had 347 points scored, averaged 24.8 points per game, 138 points given up, 9.9 points per game. And you look at their schedule, they started out Lakeland, Fort Wayne South Side, New Prairie were all big wins. Holy War, you're never going to know what's going to happen with that. They dominated Marian. Adams was domination. Then at Elkhart, 21-14 win, huge win for them. Riley, Washington, both good wins. Then you had Penn. You talked about it, John, and you'll talk a little more about it. Having that Penn game right before sectionals, yes, the physicality is one thing, but it got them ready. They started out 35-0 Riley, 14-7 hard-fought win against Northridge, 13-7 win against Mishawaka, 10-7 win against Hobart. Those three teams have a lot of
tradition.
Lost a little connection, but I'll throw it back to you with, those three teams, Northridge, Mishawaka, Hobart, all have vast playoff experience where St. Joe, not up-and-comer, but they just didn't have what those three teams had.
No, they didn't, and that's one of the things that I think when you talk to Ben Downey about his schedule, playing a Penn late in the year really helped them. And even playing Elkhart, two of their last four games were against Elkhart and against Penn, two teams that obviously you're looking at two 6A schools and you're playing 4A football. And you're looking at two 6A schools, two of your last four games of the season. If that doesn't get you ready for the playoffs, I don't know what does. And you're right. Northridge, off of a recent state championship appearance. We know what Hobart's all about. We know what the Bricks are all about. They're about winning state championships. Mishawaka, we know, as Kenny brought up a little bit earlier, about with Keith Kinder and running that option attack and how hard that is to stop that. And the fact that they were able to get through those three levels really told you something about St. Joe when they went into that game with Bishop Dwenger, who obviously is a higher level 4A when it comes to enrollment compared to a St. Joe. So again, it goes back, I think, to those defensive, and you looked at those stats, only giving up 9.9 points per game. Again, defense wins championships, and giving up less than 10 points a game, that's pretty darn good. And that is a staple of a Ben Downey Husky team, is play solid defense and let your offense try to score some points. You're not going to outscore everybody. You're just not going to do that. And he turns to his defense, and his defensive staff did a great job last year, led by James Trini, who we'll talk about, I'm sure, here in a little bit.
And Kenny, before we get into the individual stats, if I can talk, yes. You saw St. Joe, obviously, earlier in the year, 43-13 win for the Huskies, but you kind of kept tabs on them all throughout the year, and we each three said they were our shocking team of the year. What did you see from St. Joe last year that gives you confidence in the upcoming year that they can just continue building?
I think, Drew, when you look at them, I think they've got athletes up and down the lineup. I mean, you look at Crediti, he's one that really impressed me when I saw him last year against New Prairie. He had an 89-yard kickoff return against the Cougars. But I just think what you're seeing in St. Joe right now is some really good athletes that are being coached up very, very well. And I think you look at them guys and, they're a team that I think is really going to not surprise people more, but I think is going to do very, very well this year because Ben Downey's got the culture going again. And John, you remember the days when you guys covered St. Joe on a regular basis, and you knew what the standard that Ben had there. He's bringing it back there to St. Joe. And now you've got people in the St. Joe community really excited about Husky football again, including one of our close friends of the show, one Terry McFadden, who was a big fan of what we do at the St. Joe stuff. But you look at them guys, I just think they got something really rolling there, and they're going to be a force. They're going to be a real force, I think, in 4A this year, especially here in Michiana.
Well, you look at the schedule; it's the same as last year, just obviously home and away splits. At Lakeland, home against Fort Wayne South, back-to-back at New Prairie, at Marian. As we said, Holy War, you never know what's going to happen. But you get Adams at home. You get that Elkhart game at home, which I think is going to be huge as we get into Elkhart. At Riley, home against Washington, end the year at Penn. I think that Elkhart game is going to be huge for how the conference plays out, but not bad home away splits. Obviously, you would, with this schedule, you would like Penn at home at Father Bly Field, but not too terrible with the conference home and away splits at all.
Well, you look at their schedule. I mean, you're rattling off the names of that schedule. I'm looking at the 9 games they're playing. They should be favored at 8 of them. I mean, they should be. I mean, the only game that right now, looking at their schedule, that they would not be a favorite in my opinion, is at Penn on October the 16th. Other than that, and I'm being honest, I don't know if there's a team on the schedule that beats St. Joe until they get to Penn.
Kind of like last year.
I would agree. That includes Elkhart. I think right now, I can't see why St. Joe can't go to Elkhart and win or beat Elkhart. I don't see any reason why they can't. I mean, they won last year at Rice Field, and they got him at Father Bly this year. So, like I said, the schedule's set up good for them to be 8-0 going into that final game against Penn.
And one of the things St. Joe will have the advantage of this year is they have both quarterbacks. Both will be back. Snap Cicatino and Anthony Gooby. They're both back. They're both seniors this year. And so that's a nice problem that Ben's going to have going into fall camp here coming up in a couple of weeks. He's got both of his quarterbacks back. He's also got a couple of wide receivers back. He has to find a kicker. He's got some offensive and defensive linemen to replace. But obviously that secondary is going to be locked down with James Trinity. So that standard that Ben has set over the years when he was a state championship coach, and even when he was a state championship player back in 1995 when he played for Frank Amato, he has brought that back to St. Joe, and the kids know what to expect. You go to their practice and you can watch for 5 minutes. And Kenny, over the years, I've gone a lot of St. Joe practices. Yep. And I'll tell you something, he's into it, man. He is into it. His coaching staff is into it. And he's out there, and they are working hard, and they hit hard in practice. And I think that has paid them a lot of dividends. And I agree. I don't see anybody on their schedule until that week 9 date with Penn that we will have here on broadcastsport.net, of course. They're going to go in there 8-0. If they aren't, that's because of injury or something crazy happened. Yeah, because this is going to be when you can start with your 2 quarterbacks, you can build around that. And they got a couple. I know Franco Biffle graduated, but you've got a couple young running backs who showed some things last year as well. You can start with those 4, have Trinity in that defensive secondary. You've got a great start going in August 3rd on the first day of practice.
Can we do a little plug real quick?
Absolutely.
For you guys will be the only ones that will have that game with live video, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. We have been approved by Penn High School to provide live video of that game. Drew, I know you're looking forward to doing that game. We really enjoyed doing that last year at Father Bly. What a great atmosphere, Kenny. And you've always talked about the standing rooms at Amzie Miller with New Prairie. Amazing. It was 2-3 rows deep at Father Bly. There wasn't a seat to be found last year for that game, and that was just a great atmosphere that night.
Well, absolutely. I mean, even though the final score didn't go the way St. Joe wanted, it was. I mean, to have that, that's something you can build on as a community.
Listening to people walking by when we got off the air and we were packing up our gear, just listening to the buzz of people that were walking by, they were okay with that because they knew the kids competed. They competed hard against the best team in the conference, and boy, did that pay off in that little run they had before they ran into a very good Dwenger team there in the semi-state.
You've heard me say this before. I call Penn Notre Dame. I mean, that's what they are. They're Notre Dame, and everybody shoots for them every Friday night, and if you somehow can knock them off, that's a massive feather in the hat.
It is. But if you also don't knock them off, as long as you were competitive, that's something that Ben took into that next week. He said, okay, final score, but you know what? We were competitive for about 3 quarters, and then obviously the physicality kind of wore St. Joe out in the 4th quarter. But he was happy with the performance, and that's what really kind of bolstered them in that tournament run they had a year ago.
Right.
Well, we take a look at kind of some of the stats from last year. As you said, both quarterbacks coming back. Cicatano, 73 of 129, 1,041 yards, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Gooby, 37 to 65, 487, 57 percent completion, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. You get them both back in the same system, another year, growing. Obviously, going to have a quarterback battle again this year, I'd assume. Gooby started, Shikatano won. Both of them have to have confidence. That has to be have the possibility to pay huge dividends for this St. Joe offense.
Well, I think what's really important here is both of them have starting quarterback experience. Gooby started at Adams before he went to St. Joe, won the starting job in the fall, and then, of course, Shikatano took it over. One of the things I was impressed with Gooby was may have lost his job, but he pushed Sam Shikatano. He really, really did and supported him and was a really good teammate. And when you can start with the two kind of teammates that are that good, and you have that going into fall camp, boy, does that give a lot of relief to Ben Downey because he's got that check mark. I got me a starting quarterback already, two of which who have starting experience.
You look at just team stats, rushing-wise, 475 carries, 2,426 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, 27 touchdowns on the season. Passing-wise, they had 1,637 yards, 122 out of 223, 11 touchdowns. So they were still more run-heavy, as we know St. Joe will be. But the ability to introduce a passing game and now bring both quarterbacks back is going to be huge. Now we talk about what they have to replace. Offensively, they have to replace 56% of their receptions, 64% of their yards, and 57% of their touchdowns, with both Downey and Radigan both gone.
But that starts with Will Solomon, the sophomore. I think you're going to see a lot. He's going to get a lot of carries. He had 75 carries last year, a little over 400 yards behind David Waite. But I'll tell you something, this kid's only a sophomore. He impressed me last year when we saw him run the football. And I think until they can figure out that wide receiver room a little bit, I think you're going to see Solomon get a boatload of carries, especially early in the season, to make Shikatano or Gooby, whoever wins that job, a little more comfortable in the passing game so they can work on the timing and that relationship. And but when you've got a running back that had a lot of carries as a freshman last year on a Friday night under the lights, you start there. That's another advantage for Ben Downey is, okay, I've got starting quarterbacks. I've got an fairly experienced running back. Now I can work on replacing my son Dallas Downey, who we know is a great wide receiver, great kick return man, as well as a darn pretty good center fielder too for the St. Joe baseball team. He can work on that with that offensive staff. Say, okay, we're going to run the ball, but when we're ready to mix in the pass, let's work on that. And I think that's going to be part of the concentration in fall camp on the offensive side is getting that wide receiver room on the same page with the quarterback room.
Defensively, you look at this, and we all know defense wins championships. That's how Ben Downey really makes this team. He had a great team all around. Tackles for loss, they had a total of 86. They had 38 sacks, 20 interceptions. 869 tackles, 534 solo, 335 assists. A fantastic all-around defense. But then you look at it, they are losing 7 of their top 10 tacklers to graduation. They are losing 67% of their tackles for loss, 58 of 86. They're losing 27 of 38 sacks, 71%. They're losing 55% of their interceptions. They have a lot to figure out on the defensive side of the ball.
Does that put a lot of pressure on that secondary then? Because obviously the leader of that defense is probably going to come from that safety position in James Trinity. That's the question I'm going to pose here. Does that really fall on that secondary until the black shirts can really figure it out there up front?
Yeah.
And Kenny, we'll get to New Prairie, but you're going through kind of a little bit of a rebuild, you could say, and it's more on the offensive side. New Prairie's always had a pretty good defense. Their defense was down last year, but this year they have to replace a good chunk of offense. St. Joe has to replace a good chunk of defense. So, from that perspective for you, what do you think, kind of going along with the question John has, what do you think St. Joe is really going to need to have step up early on in the season for them to kind of get the boat steering right.
I think it's got to be on the defensive end of the field, guys. I think, you've got to be able to have that solid defense. And I think that's one thing that's going to have to be critical, like for St. Joe this year is, they've got a lot of offensive playmakers, but can they get enough stops to, excuse me, can they get stops defensively when they need them in critical moments? And if they can build that defense from the ground up here at the start, they've got a good enough offense that they should be able to score points. Are they able to get the kind of stops that they'll need to keep that offense on the field? Because I think St. Joe's offense is as good as anybody around here.
Well, we kind of talk about who they're losing, who they're bringing back. And I think a big part of this, yes, they're bringing back the quarterbacks. Yes, they're bringing back Solomon. Talked about it a little bit. I think Creniti is going to have a huge start of this season for this St. Joe offensively and defensively for them to really get on the right track because of what he did last season and the accolades he's getting early on before the season even starts.
Yeah, very much so, because he's getting all these preseason accolades. He's probably going to be the leader of that defense. The pressure's on him, but I think that with again, going back to what I said earlier about their secondary coach and Trevor Dokes, he knows how to coach him up. I'm telling you, I watched this guy coach for many years. He was at Clay for a while. Obviously been at St. Joe for a number of years. This guy can coach him up with the best of them. And he'll have that secondary unit ready to go on Friday night. And they may have to lean on that a little bit. So you might see early in the year, you might see the defensive secondary leading the tackling until that front four and those three linebackers. He likes to run that 4-3, and he'll mix it up sometimes until they can get that figured out. I think Creniti in that secondary is probably going to have to be leaned on a lot defensively for St. Joe to get off the field to give that offense the opportunity they need to score points.
Next up, we have the Elkhart Lions. They finished the season 6-4 overall, 5-2 in the conference. They lost in sectionals. They had 295 points scored on the season, 29.5 points per game. Gave up 223 points on the season, 22.6 points per game. And I think John would agree with me. Kenny, you seem to be in the boat of it's Penn, then it's St. Joe. We'll go through the stats. I think if this Elkhart team can figure out their defense by the time they reach St. Joe, that's going to be an important game because they bring back a lot of their offense, and they are my St. Joe team of the 2026 season. They could surprise a lot of people in this area. I know they were 6-4 overall, but with what they have coming back, they could be my surprise team of the NIC Conference this year.
Guys, I look at them and Trevon Curry's beginning his third year there. He's done a nice job so far. Over there. They've had some great success. I mean, obviously, 2 years ago they went over to Penn and knocked off Penn 7-3 in a game that was a very interesting game. First time they had beaten Penn as a combined school. But you look at their opening schedule. I mean, they've got some heavyweights right off the bat. Concord and Warren Central right off the top. As Lee Corso would say, yo.
Yeah.
Because that's a formidable duo that you're facing right off the bat. But then, at that point, the schedule does lighten up a little bit for them, And those are games that they should win before they get to St. Joe and Penn.
And again, yeah, you're right. And again, with Elkhart, they're going to rely a lot on Micah Jarrell, the 6'4", 210-pound senior quarterback. He led them in passing and in rushing a year ago. And that's going to start with them, again, as their quarterback. And so I guess for Taban, it's probably good you got an experienced quarterback because when you're going to go baptize the new Jake Field on August 21st, yeah, big night there in Dunlap, baptizing the new field. And then here comes Warren Central, a tough 6A school. It comes to Rice Field week 2. You're probably grateful you got a starting quarterback that's got a lot of experience who's played in some big-time games.
Yeah, it's it's definitely baptized by fire for this season for Elkhart, but those aren't. I don't want to say no game matters. Every game matters, but those aren't conference games. Those are games that you want to start out with a win. No one wants to lose, but you have your quarterback. You bring back your top two ball carriers in Gerald and Newbern. You bring back your top wide receiver. You bring back your second wide receiver. You bring back a lot of your offense. It's the defense you'll lose, and we'll get into that. But you start out, offense should be able to hit the ground running. Defensively, you'll have to build up to that. But with an offense, if you're in games 35-42, 38-42, that type of thing, especially against Warren Central, that Concord game is going to – the atmosphere alone, just because they're opening a brand new field, that's – Concord's had the same field their whole existence, correct?
Yep. The Jake's been there a long – well, no.
Been there a long time. They played at Rice Field for when they first started back in the 60s.
You're right.
I think Jake Field's been around, late – because I think when New Prairie started their football program in 68, 69 in that area, I believe they played Concord at the Jake.
Okay.
So it's been there at least since the mid-60s.
So you're talking about the same field for 60 years.
Close to it, yep.
So brand new field, brand new. I know they've been upgrading the stadium around it as well. So the atmosphere just for the unveiling alone is going to be huge. Warren Central, as you guys said, a tough 6A school that, I mean, it's lucky they come to Rice Field, not Elkhart going to Warren Central. But after those two games, you immediately go Washington and Riley, back-to-back, Washington at home, Riley on the road. So there's your kind of landing strip after those two games. You get New Prairie as kind of a step up before you get St. Joe at St. Joe. But, however, back-to-back weeks at St. Joe, at Penn for this Elkhart team, it's going to be tough, definitely. But if they can split that, I mean, I think they would consider that a huge success.
You know, guys, we were talking about Concord's field. I just pulled this up here just by pure coincidence. The first game played at Jake Field was in 1968.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and you want to take a guess who the opponent was that night, Mr. Clawwitter?
Jimtown.
You got it.
You know, that the start of the Cable Line Cup?
No, actually, it was before that, I believe.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did Jimtown win at least?
Win that game? Well, let's find out here. I can tell you. Give me just a second here.
It'd be nice.
Our broadcast sport.net historian looking things up.
Jimtown won that game. They spoiled the fun, 29-7.
Yeah. So I mean, Elkhart could pull a Jimtown and spoil the fun. Second time that Concord gets a brand new Jake Field, can they go 1-1 or will they go 0-2?
Well, for the record, there, Mr. Clawwitter, there were 3,000 people at Jake Field that night.
I believe
according to the Elkhart Truth.
I think there could be over 3,000 people at this game coming up on August 21st.
Yeah, especially opening night of the season, which is always an excitement for everybody. And then, unveiling the brand new field, and, Concord's marching band is always good. And they entertain with the best of them around the area. And that'll be a fun one. That'll be a fun one that night.
Yeah. And the only reason why I knew about Concord playing at Rice Field was because my dad, when he was at New Carlisle, they played Concord. And they played them at Rice Field back in the day.
I've never played at Rice Field. Obviously, Jimtown Elkhart never played. I've been to Rice Field several times when Memorial and Central played.
Oh, yeah.
That was always a fun game when I was growing up. But to get back on track,
yes.
Just kind of looking at some of the stats, as we said, Gerald passing wise, 98 of 151, 1644 yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Leading rusher, 133 carries, 842 yards, 14 touchdowns. So Gerald was responsible for 27 touchdowns on the season. Willis, his top target, 24 receptions, 534 yards, 4 touchdowns. Defensively, they had a lot of great defensive players. Kay Jones had 103 tackles, 23 tackles for loss. Horton had 4.5 sacks. As a team, they had 18 sacks, 98 tackles for loss. I thought I mistyped when I first built this document. I won't lie. But then you look at what they're losing defensively. They're losing 6 of their top 10 tacklers. They're losing 43 tackles for loss of those 98. They're losing 6 of 18 sacks. They're losing Roberts. They're losing Buzzard, and they're losing Newburn. So all 3 of those names, 2 of them are on their defensive line. Newburn was their second leading carrier on the season with 7 touchdowns, 788 yards. So very much like St. Joe, Elkhart has to figure out their defensive line situation, losing a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of sacks. And unlike St. Joe, they don't have the easy landing path early on in the season. That's why I say for Elkhart to have their quarterback who be the leading rusher and passer, along with their 2 leading receivers back, they're going to have to carry the way early in the season. They just are.
Right.
I would agree.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get into South Bend Adams, we're going to take a quick commercial break, give our sponsors some love, and we'll be right back at the 574 Sports Report.
Bend is Barnaby's on Jefferson Street. Our South Bend location stands out from all other Barnaby's because our pizza is made with the original recipe and baked in the original ovens. If you want the original Barnaby's taste, you've got to come to South Bend. Since opening in 1969, we've taken pride in the quality of the cheese, sausage, pepperoni, and fresh vegetables that we use on our pizzas. And Barnaby's has been voted best in the area from the South Bend Tribune 3 years straight. Order online at barnabys-pizza.com or call 574-288-4981.
Are you in need for a new door for your house or garage? The place to buy is Leitner Door of Elkhart. Leitner Door has been in business since 1979, specializing in sales, installation, and service of a variety of doors including overhead doors, electric operators, entry doors, fire doors, and more. Their service techs are trained to repair most makes and models of doors, operators, and hardware. They will help you every step of the way with a professional sales and service staff that will meet your every need. Click Leitner or call at 574-295-6311. Leitner Door. We open all the right doors.
Back on the 574 Sports Report. We're getting into South Bend Adams. 4-6 overall in the season, 3-4 in conference. They lost in the sectionals. They scored 135 points on the season, 13.5 points per game. They gave up 258 points on the season, 25.8 points per game. And you look at this schedule, they started out with a big win against Culver Academy, 35-7. Lost at Logansport, 54-6, who we will cover next week on the NLC preview. Lost to Marian, beat New Prairie, which was kind of a surprise to us all, 35-34 at New Prairie.
First win over New Prairie since Anthony Johnson was there, guys, at Adams back in the 80s.
Back probably 1985, because that was the year they beat Penn.
Yeah, 84,
85, something like
83, 84, yeah.
Okay,
I think they won, 83 they won at New Prairie.
Okay.
Then they lost back-to-back games at St. Joe, at Penn, or versus St. Joe at Penn, before beating Washington. They then beat Riley. They ended the regular season with a loss to Elkhart before bowing out to Kokomo 22-14. And this Adams team, I'll go right to you, Kenny. First time since 1983, that 35-34 game. We'll get into New Prairie next. That had to be a wild game, and I'm sure for you a frustrating game. What did you see from Adams just overall?
Well, it wasn't so much a frustrating game as much as it was, New Prairie couldn't really slow down Adams offensively. I mean, in fact, I can pull up the numbers here right now, fellas. I can tell you a little bit about that game. Give me just a quick second here. You go back to that game last year, guys, and that was a game that after it went down, I had people blowing me up saying, "What's going on with the Cougars?" And it's like, well, they're having some issues, but you look at that game last year. It's even going to the fourth quarter, and Adams wins on a Kimbrough 58-yard pass from Caden Keene with 2:26 to go in the game, and they make the extra point, and they get a stop, and they're able to get out of Amzie Miller Field with a win. And that was their first win there since they won in 1983, 17-3 at Amzie Miller Field, and snapped a 7-game New Prairie winning streak in the series. So, the one thing that impressed me was just the fact that, Adams in that game just made big play after big play in the fourth quarter. You look at their last 3 scores. Kimbrough had a 32-yard touchdown pass. McKean had a 64-yard run. And then, of course, Kimbrough with the 58-yard pass in the final 3 minutes to win the game. So you look at those last 3 touchdowns that they had, guys. You're talking about 145 yards and big plays that they made in the fourth quarter that won the ball game. And they were able to get by New Prairie's defense, and they got it done. And that was a big feather in the hat for the Eagles last year. And, they get the Cougars again at School Field. So we'll see what happens in that one this year.
Yeah, the one thing for Adams, I think that it is some stability. Frank Archeski entering his 4th year as a head coach of the Eagles. Obviously played for Adams as an Adams alum. And I think the problem that we're seeing, not just with Adams, but I think South Bend schools overall, is this school choice. Okay. Look at Gooby. He was a starter for a couple of years at Adams. Well, didn't work out. So he goes and takes his ball and he goes to St. Joe. I think we're seeing that with, Riley and Washington as well, is that a lot of these guys are not seeing success in the South Bend public schools. So they're going other places. So that kind of puts Adams and Riley and Washington behind the 8 ball a little bit. But for Adams, we saw them play Logansport last year. We know how good Logansport was last year. They got all the way to the sectional final before they lost to Lebanon, and we'll talk more about the Berries next week. But it was interesting that they were able to show that they can make some big plays, especially when they needed it. That was something we didn't see from Adams in the years past. Now we are seeing that, more and more now. And I think that is a good thing, that we're able to see a lot of those big plays from Adams, especially offensively. So we'll see how it goes. Again, Adams returns their leading rusher and their leading quarterback, and Keene, and obviously back as well as Bryce. And, they both were pretty impressive last year leading that Adams offense. So at least Coach Frank's got something to build around. The rest of it, I guess we're going to have to just wait and see.
Yeah, and you look at this schedule at Logansport to start the season. Then you do get 3 straight home games, at Culver Academy to start the season. Then you get Logansport, Marian, and New Prairie all at home. At St. Joe, home against Penn. At Washington, home against Riley. At Elkhart, obviously Washington, Riley, South Bend schools. They're home and away doesn't really matter at that point because it's School Field or very close. Jackson Field. But you get St. Joe at St. Joe, Elkhart at Elkhart, Penn at home. And you bring up a really good point, John. Offensively, they bring back Keene, bring back Bryce, but they do lose Kimbrough, their main receiver, who, as you said, Kenny, was the one that caught that game-winning touchdown with 2 minutes left from Keene. So they'll have to find a receiver to step up. Seitz is probably that next receiver for them.
And the problem you might have there is I have heard that Seitz wants to concentrate on baseball, may not play football this fall. If that's the case, that is going to hurt Adams' cause.
Yep.
So
that's just a rumor I've heard. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you lose both your top receivers. You have to figure that out. Bryce, 190 carries, 918 yards, 4.8 yards per carry, 92 yards a game, 4 touchdowns. You can build an offense around him, but you'll still need Keene to throw the ball. And then defensively, you do lose a good chunk of the defense overall. You lose only 3 of your top 10 tacklers, but you lose 60% of your interceptions, 40% of your fumble recoveries. Not that they did a whole lot. 5 interceptions, 5 fumble recoveries. So their team was rather young overall. It'll be the question of how do they grow in the offseason, and can they find the pieces to replace the key players in Kimbrough, in Jones. And I think that'll be a huge thing. We have a live schedule release for Broadcast Sport on August 8th coming up, but we will be doing the Logan Sport Adams game on August 28th.
And I think one thing that they're going to look for is a little bit more of a load for their senior tight end, Leighton Presbendowski. He's 6'2", 180. He had some good catches last year, and I think they're going to rely on him when they're not handling the ball off to Carson Bryce, probably throwing it to Leighton Presbendowski. I think that's something that Adams and Frank's going to look at heavily this year in the passing game because, you can run Carson Bryce all you want, but if they slow him down, what are you going to do? Now you got to throw the football, and if you lose your 2 receivers, now you're going to have to rely on your senior tight end, and I think that's something Frank may put into the game plan this year for the Eagles.
Next, we'll move on to the New Prairie Cougars, and I'll give a quick overview before Kenny just passing it off to you. New Prairie, last year 3-7 overall, 3-4 in conference. They did lose in sectionals to Hobart, 50-14. They scored 240 points on the season, 24 points per game. Big thing, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, they gave up 423 points, 42.3 points per game. And you look at their schedule, they start out with 5 straight losses: LaPorte, Northwood, St. Joe, Adams, Elkhart. Adams game, the only one being close, 35-34. They rattle off a couple wins against Riley and Marian, both of them one-score games. Get blanked by Penn. They beat Washington 44-35 before losing to Hobart. You lose Reed Robinson. You lose, I'm going to butcher this name, so I'll rely on you to say it correctly. Mamaza. And they lose.
At least I got Presbendowski right.
Yeah.
So, Kenny, I'll turn it over to you. What can we expect from New Prairie coming from last year into this year?
Well, guys, I think the big thing I think New Prairie really has to improve on this year is the defensive end. I mean, they gave up at times way too many big plays. And you look at the games that they lost. I mean, early in the year, I go to that LaPorte game and I still think of it as probably the most interesting game of the losses because here you were, first game for a new coach, and you were coming into LaPorte, and as bad as things were that night, it's a 1-score game with 7 minutes to go against a team that should have beaten you by 2 or 3 scores. I mean, they ended up pulling away at the end, but it was a game that was much closer than what it should have been, to be honest with you. And then, of course, the following week, Northwood comes in and blows the doors off of them. And same thing happens with St. Joe. And then the game against Adams, I thought, yeah, they lost, but I think it was a real turning point in that the kids started saying, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a win around the corner. And then the way they were able to fight back against Riley, I mean, that game was really, really crazy, guys. I mean, it was a back and forth game. And it really, Sully Cress's 61-yard touchdown pass from Reed Robinson gave them the lead, and then from there it was back and forth. They were able to get some stops and then find a way to win at the end. And this is the thing I think New Prairie fans need to be patient about. And I know patience is not a word sometimes that's really popular in New Carlisle and Rolling Prairie, and in parts east of New Carlisle, but they've got to realize, people here got to realize, they've lived a golden era for a decade. Okay, 2 trips to the state finals, 2 wins over Penn. The talent that you had coming through was as good as it's ever been here. Now you're going through a little bit of a hiccup, but you got to be patient and understand that this group, they're out there competing, they're out there trying, they're going to get better. And I think that's been the kind of the thing that I've seen so far with New Prairie, having watched them the other night against Portage in a scrimmage. There's some signs that they're getting better defensively. Whether it translates into game action remains to be seen. That's the thing that I think it's going to be really, really critical for New Prairie this year, because you're replacing a quarterback in Reed Robinson, who was your Mr. Everything for 4 years out there running the show. And you got a young man by the name of Charlie Laskowski, who I've seen in the scrimmages. This kid might be the biggest kid I've ever seen quarterbacking the Cougars. He's every bit of 6'3", 6'4" right now, okay? And normally most New Prairie quarterbacks, I mean, let's go down the list. Jake Finley, Kamichek, Ketterer, none of those guys were giants. And this kid at 6'3", he's a big kid. Now, he has some kinks he's got to work out in adjusting to being the starting quarterback, but I think this is a kid that really needs to be their game manager. And what I mean by that is, do what you have to do with the offense, limit turnovers, and 3 to 4 yards a game running the football is, if you're Ryan O'Shea, you'll take that all day. And then if you throw in some play action passes when the defense isn't expecting it, you've got an opportunity to score points. But I think, guys, it comes down to, can New Prairie do enough defensively to give them a chance to win games? Because you look at that beginning of the schedule, you got LaPorte coming in for the Milk Can game. You got to go to Napanee, and good luck with that, going over to Jim Andrews Field and winning that one. And then you come back with St. Joe, Adams, and Elkhart. I mean, right there, those are 5 teams that athletically, they're better athletically than you. And you got to find a way to, I think, try to steal one of those games, maybe 2. 2 would be a stretch of those first 5. If they could get through that first stretch 1 and 4, I think they'll be fine. It's just, you got to have the patience right now, if you're a New Prairie fan, to realize there's some talent coming up. There's going to be a young man that's going to be starting for them more than likely at running back this year. Cat Ray is his son. He'll be playing some running back, and don't be surprised to see him playing some defense and also doing some kicking for them this season. But it's going to be interesting to see if the Cougars can go through and try to bounce back after last year's 3-7 season.
I think it'll be really interesting to see how they how you were talking about it, build with this schedule, with the replacement of Robinson, with what they're losing defensively, and how they're going to try and rebuild this offense around a brand new quarterback. I mean, 100% of the passing touchdowns, 90%, 97% of the passes. You're losing 69% of carries, 72% of rushing yards, 86% of rushing touchdowns, 79% of receptions, 91% of receiving yards, 100% of touchdowns. You're losing 79% of your total offense and 88% of your total points. That is...
And another thing New Prairie's going to have to really do a much better job of this year, they've got to shore up things at special teams. At times last year, special teams kind of really, really hurt the Cougars, and they've got to get better at that. They've got to be able to cover better on the kickoffs and do those things, because they got burned last year against St. Joe on a kick return. They got burned against LaPorte on a kick return. So they've got to be able to go through and find a way to clean up special teams. If they're able to clean up things on the special teams, then guys, I think they can do some things. But special teams, they can't give up the cheap touchdowns against who they're playing this year.
And Ken, do you think that's going to be a point of emphasis with Ryan O'Shea and the staff? I know that during fall camp, you don't put a lot of special teams in because when you get to scrimmage week, you see a lot of teams not using the kicking option. But is that going to be a point of emphasis, you think, for Ryan O'Shea and the staff that has been in this offseason?
I think so because, well, I'll give you a great example. You look at the LaPorte game the last couple of years. Last year, they gave up a punt return to Reed Raymond.
Right. Yeah.
2 years before that, when LaPorte came to Amzie Miller, the only touchdowns that LaPorte scored were on special teams mistakes. One was a kickoff return. One was a bad snap on a punt that ended up in the end zone for a touchdown. So that's 3 touchdowns you've given up to your rival right there that, you know, they were fortunate that they had a big enough lead when LaPorte came here 2 years ago to win. But last year, that punt return was really big because you take that punt return away. You know, I was saying it was 20-14 with 7 minutes to go. You take that kick return away, they got the lead with 7 minutes to go. Now you put pressure on LaPorte's offense to maybe have to open things up a little bit. And that's going to be really key, I think, in the opener is if New Prairie could force LaPorte to play left-handed. What I mean by that is score early, contain Reed Raymond, and whoever LaPorte decides to start a quarterback who will be his first game, it'll be on the road at New Prairie, force whoever starts a quarterback for LaPorte to have to throw the ball. Make LaPorte have to be 2nd and 6, 3rd and 9. That way, you know they're really not going to try to run on 3rd and 9. So that's the thing I think it's going to be critical is that they've got to be able to do that is take away special teams mistakes. And in the opener, if they're able to contain Reed Raymond, you know, you're not going to completely stop him. But if you contain him enough to force LaPorte to have to throw instead of when they want to throw, you got a shot in that game.
So my question to you, Kenny, will be, and obviously football season coming up, college football is coming up as well. I listened to a couple podcasts for college football, and their biggest thing, along with, you know, total losses and people coming back, if you bring back bad defense, can a year of building make bad defense good, or does it just build on a little bit of problems that it doesn't really make it good? It just kind of hides a couple different things. So they bring back a lot of their defense from last year that gave up 423 points.
Yeah, good.
What can we expect with bringing back the defense? Was it a very young defense that just was trying to learn, or was it just kids that haven't played a whole lot, that juniors and sophomores, now they'll be seniors and juniors, that maybe they'll get a little better, but not exponentially?
Well, I think a lot of it was there was a lot of inexperience because New Prairie graduated a lot of guys the year before on that defensive side of the ball. So you were throwing guys in there that really hadn't seen much time at the varsity level. Now that they've got a year under the belt, they seem to be a little bit more confident in the way they're doing things here as they get ready for fall camp. Can that carry over into the first game? And one of the advantages I think that they're going to have going into that first game is they're not going to face a team like an Elkhart or a St. Joe or an Adams where they could spread you all over the field and they could go 3-4 wides and you're putting pressure on that secondary to cover the athletes that they have. They're going to see a LaPorte team in that opener that's going to predominantly run the ball, and they'll throw when they want to throw the ball. And you want to make LaPorte throw the ball when they have to throw the ball on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9 situations. I mean, I think that's what helps New Prairie in this opener is that they know that they're going to be going against a team that's going to be mano-a-mano at the line of scrimmage, and they've got to be able to win the battle at the line of scrimmage if they're going to have a chance to win that game. If they're able to, then that gives that front 7 an opportunity to put pressure on LaPorte when they throw on 2nd down or 3rd down, and then you've got to trust your guys in the secondary to be able to make the plays. But this will be a good LaPorte team that they're going to see in the opener, but they're going to see good athletes, but they're not going to see the speed burners that you're going to see later on in the season with St. Joe and Adams and Elkhart and Penn and the like. So, like I say, and if Laskowski can go through and be that game manager that they desperately need to have, and really grind it out, they'll be all right. I mean, it's kind of nice to watch a kid who's 6'3", 6'4", out on the field quarterbacking the offense, because I think he's got great advantages when he scrambles, because if he's able to get out of the pocket and take off, he could really use his athleticism to his great advantage.
Up next, we will have the South Bend Riley Wildcats. 4-6 overall on the season, 2-5 in conference. They lost in sectionals to South Bend St. Joe. They scored 210 points, 21 points per game. They gave up 238 points, 23.8 points per game. Unfortunately, this is the second team we don't have stats for. So we'll kind of give a quick overview of last season from the schedule, look at this season. They started out back-to-back wins against Hammond Bishop Knoll and Fort Wayne, both scoring 30-plus points a game. Then they had two back-to-back opponents at Penn, at Elkhart, where they got dominated by Penn, and they fought hard against Elkhart. They lost 39-22. They beat Washington 33-16, lost to New Prairie 45-42, lost to St. Joe 21-6, lost to Adams in a tight 10-8 game. They beat Mishawaka Marian to end the regular season 25-17 before losing to St. Joe in sectionals. You look at this season, they start at home against Hammond Knoll. They then travel to Valparaiso before they get Penn and Elkhart back-to-back at home, at Washington, at New Prairie. St. Joe goes to Riley. Then they finish at Adams, at Marian. Gentlemen, I'll leave the floor open because we have no stats. What do we think we could see from the Riley Wildcats this year?
Going to be an interesting question. Darrick Lee has built his team on offense the last few years, but their defense has been kind of shredded here as of recent. And this, again, goes back to my comment earlier about you don't know who's going to come to camp. Here we go. You got all these guys that now can, with all this school choice, you can take your ball and go somewhere else. What are they going to do on the south side of town? One thing I will give Riley credit for is boosting their schedule. Going to Valparaiso week 2, you look at that week 2, 3, and 4, they can certainly be 1 and 3 by the time they go to Washington to start trying to win a city championship. And you talk to Darrick Lee, and that's important because you do want to beat Washington and Adams. You want to beat your rivals to get that city trophy. But when you talk to him and you see that he's playing Valparaiso, Penn, and Elkhart the first 3 weeks and take your lumps, then except for really for St. Joe, it kind of softens after that. That might get Riley to make a little bit of a run. I think the question is going to be, can they move the ball offensively and can they stop somebody? They just could not stop anybody a year ago defensively, which was very uncharacteristic of a Darrick Lee team. But I'm sure he'll coach him up, and we will see. But I think there's a lot of question marks on the south side of South Bend this fall.
Well, guys, you talk about their struggles defensively. I go back to that New Prairie game last year, guys. They came out of the gate. They're up 12-0 at the end of the first quarter and really just in control. And then New Prairie got things rolling and scored 45 points in the last 3 quarters. And they just didn't really have an answer for the Cougars and the way the New Prairie's offense was. I mean, heck, New Prairie last year in that game had 368 yards of offense.
Yeah.
Even though Riley outgained it by a significant amount, Riley gave up too many big plays at the wrong time that allowed New Prairie to get out of there with a win. And they've got to tear things up defensively.
Well, they do, and that's the problem. They come out like gangbusters. We know they can score points. They had a pretty good offense, but then they got a little complacent. And I think complacency might be a good word to use for Riley last year. We're up 12-0. New Prairie's down. It's not a problem. And then here's what New Prairie does to them. And a lot of teams did that to them a year ago. I think they're going to have to try to really get that complacency out of there. And one of the things I wish the South Bend coaches would do, and I don't know if they do this on a regular basis, you talk to Ben Downey in St. Joe, and what does he do? He stands out in the hallways in passing periods. He sees some big guy coming down the hallway. Hey, you want to play football? I can help. I can teach you the game if you want to play football. I would hope that Dark Lee at Riley and Frank Archeski at Adams and even Jay Johnson over at Washington, they're in the building. Get out there and recruit some of those kids that are in the hallways.
Right.
You've got big enough schools. Now, Washington is the smallest of the three, but Adams and Riley, they're the two biggest schools in South Bend. Go get some players. You can
They're
coach.
there.
You got a great staff. Go get some players. Go get them. Come on, play for me. Come on, I'll help you out. That's the problem. The numbers are down in South Bend. They can't compete. Numbers is a huge problem. And Riley saw that last year. Their numbers from those 2 good years where they were successful, they just really dropped and tanked last year. And I'm seeing a trend in that. And that's where these coaches have got to go and say, hey, we got to go in the middle schools. We've got to go in the hallways. We got to get these kids out to play football.
Right.
Well, with that, we're going to take another short break. We'll come back and do the final 2 teams with South Bend Washington Panthers and the Mishawaka Marian Knights. But first, some commercial breaks from our sponsors.
May Oberfell-Lorber is dedicated to advising you on a broad range of legal matters focused on positive outcomes, finding quick and effective resolutions to your legal disputes, whether it's estate planning, real estate, personal injuries, business transactions, employment issues, or litigation. May Oberfell-Lorber. They're your neighbors, your friends, your local team with offices in Mishawaka and Southwest Michigan with over 150 years experience. May Oberfell-Lorber. Accessible, experienced, versatile. Visit maylorber.com.
Courage Chiropractic and Wellness Center. When your body needs somebody to help.
Hello, I'm Dr. Karch, and I want to invite you to stop by my office on Cleveland Road in South Bend, just east of Portage Avenue. I've been serving Michiana for over 20 years, specializing in back pain, neck pain, headaches, naturally with gentle chiropractic care. Come see me for a free consultation.
Courage Chiropractic and Wellness Center. When your body needs somebody to help.
Welcome back to the 574 Sports Report. I'm your host, Drew Clauder, along with me, John Overmyer, Kenny Peterson. I want to also thank broadcastsport.net, allowing me to put the podcast back on, being able to have a platform to put it on, as well as YouTube. You can find us at 574 Sports Report. Follow us on Twitter at 574 Sports. Facebook, 574 Sports Report as well. If you like what you hear, please share with your friends, family, anyone who loves high school football in and around northern Indiana. We try and do our best. Kenny Peterson, the voice of New Prairie, he will be covering New Prairie all season long, along with Coach Pat King. Me and John Overmyer will have a game of the week. We will be doing a live schedule release August 8th at Digsy Dogs and Grill on their patio, perhaps? Yes? No?
Yeah, I believe.
Yes.
I believe so. Yes.
Well, let's give the address for those that want to take the chance to come out and meet us. It's at 8310 East County Road 700 North there in Hudson Lake. It'll be right across the street from the South Shore train station. And I know Jennifer and Jason are all excited to have us come on over there. The charter for the John Overmyer fan club, I should say. That
Is there an autograph signing session scheduled?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure they'll promote it. But no, we'll be there. And I'll tell you what, folks, the food there, their burgers and the food that they serve their guys is unbelievable. They do a great job. You can't find a parking spot there on a Saturday afternoon if you go down to the lake, because it is packed most Saturdays in the summertime. And the job that they do is tremendous. And of course, there are sponsors on our pregame show on Friday night. And also want to mention, Drew, our videographer, Jim Airbrandt.
Yes.
Jim is a big part of what we do also. And it'll be nice to have the coach, Pat King, with us. Unfortunately, I think Pat's going to be out of town for the opener, isn't he?
Yeah, he's going to be out of town for the opener, and I think he's going to miss the St. Joe game as well.
So we'll have to work here the next couple of weeks.
Family and golf. Yeah, come on.
Come on. But no, we'll find somebody that could be a guest color analyst. I may reach out to someone who's a somewhat local to see if he would be interested in doing this.
But not only will we be doing a live schedule release, we'll have a live podcast that day to kind of go over everything that the last podcast, this podcast, next podcast, along with, the schedule release. Maybe we'll have a couple people come on, talk. It's all being built right now, but it'll be a live podcast on YouTube. So make sure you do go and follow us on YouTube. Hit the notification bell so you do get the announcement when we do go live that Saturday, August 8th. With all the business out of the way, we can get to our last two teams. First, the South Bend Washington Panthers. Tough season last year, 2-8 overall, 1-6 in the conference. They did lose in their sectional game against Plymouth, 44-23. Really struggled offensively, 186 points, 18.6 points per game last year scored. They gave up 346 points, 34.6 points per game. You look at their schedule last year, they started out strong, 31-0 win against Hammond Central, and then it fell off. 38-21 loss to Goshen, 34-13 loss to Elkhart, 62-0 blanking by Penn, 33-16 loss to Riley. Their one conference win, they did beat Marian in a great 28-21 game. Then they lost to Adams 28-7, St. Joe 42-12, New Prairie to end the year 44-35 before losing to Plymouth in sectionals 44-23. And guys, it was definitely a tough season on the west side of South Bend, but the bright spot they had was Lineberry. He led the conference in receiving yards, 58 receptions, 1,248 yards, 15 receiving touchdowns. Unfortunately for them, he graduated.
Yeah, he actually just played in the North-South All-Star game last weekend, representing the only South Bend player to do that in several years. So he was their dog last year, that's for sure.
So you look at their upcoming games, Hammond Central at home. They then travel to Goshen, travel to Elkhart, travel to Penn, Riley at home, at Marian, Adams at home, at St. Joe. They end at home against New Prairie. So they do have both Riley and Adams at home. It is a home game, however, whatever you called, just down the road home games. But it's definitely going to be another tough season potentially. They do bring back their quarterbacks. In Green, he was a freshman last year. They lose Young. They bring back their two running backs. They do lose the conference leading tackler in Verse. He graduated as well. So you're replacing Verse, you're replacing Lineberry. You bring back a freshman quarterback, another year in the system. It'll be interesting to see what Washington can produce this year on the west side.
Yeah. I go ahead, Kenny.
It's going to be a challenge. There's no question about it. And we were talking earlier about school of choice. I think right here is a perfect example of what school of choice has done to the football program at South Bend, Washington, because for many, many years, those kids that lived west of town out in the country, out in the Crumbstown, Leidick area, when it was Washington and there was no such thing as school of choice, those kids were going to Washington. Now those kids that live out in that same area are going to New Prairie or other places. And that has really, it's no secret, that's really, really hurt Washington's program, losing the kids from that area. And also, too, when Green Township seceded from South Bend to join John Glenn, that's another area that they lost out on kids. So it's been a struggle to try to get those kind of kids that you need to compete in this conference out there. And Jay Johnson, God love him, he's doing the best he can with what he's got. And it's unfortunate what's going, with the state of their program. But look, I hope at some point they get it back to where it once was, because back when it was really humming, Washington football was as feared as any football program in the state. But yeah, you're right. You look at that schedule.
Yeah.
Other than Hammond Central, I mean, there's going to be some tough sledding on that schedule, fellas. I mean, it's going to be a tough year for the Panthers. Trying to find wins, and I will say this: I saw them last year against New Prairie, and they gave New Prairie all it could handle, but the Cougars were able to find a way to outscore them. I mean, they were out athleted in some spots, but the Cougars found a way to get it done. And you hope that Jay Johnson can, beat the drums in the hallways and both the high school and the middle school to get people excited about football.
Yeah, and I think that's what they have to do, because you look at the middle school football, you've got Jackson, Dark Lee can go there, say, hey, come play for me at Ryler. Even Jay can do that now with that school choice. It's not like you have to stay within your district within the corporation. You've got Jackson, you've got LaSalle, you've got, Navarre's playing. You've got some really good middle school football programs in South Bend. They need to pluck these kids before they decide, oh, I don't want to go to Washington. I don't want to go to Riley. I don't want to go to Adams. And if they do that, I think Washington can kind of get back to where they used to be. It's going to take some time, and Jay's working his tail off. But it's the problem is, again, it's just numbers again. It's a numbers thing. And, you can get away with that sometimes in other sports. And you look at Washington athletics overall, they had to cancel their baseball season at the beginning of May. Kenny, we knew that because they ended up withdrawing from the sectional down at Plymouth, which everything had to be rescheduled. Softball team got started. They had to give up their softball team because they didn't have enough numbers. And then they got some kids that were hurt and a couple kids quit. They're done. Something has to be a little more positive, and that schedule for them is just brutal. Goshen's got a new coach. Who knows what they're going to be like? And then you get into the NIC, and that's just going to be brutal each and every Friday night.
Right.
It's the fact that they start the NIC at Elkhart at Penn. I mean, I don't want to disparage Washington or give any perceived thoughts, but you're starting conference play 0-2. I think we could all be pretty brutally honest about that, because Elkhart is my sleeper team in the conference. Penn is the team in the conference. So you start those back to back. Not only you start with those, you travel to them. I mean, that's a tough way to start the conference.
Yeah, going to Rice Field with that beautiful facility, and they just added a brand new scoreboard this week at Rice Field. Then you get to go over there to Everweiss Freed Field. We know all of us have been there. We know what that atmosphere is like each and every Friday night. So that is a tough way to start the conference. And then obviously you host South Bend Riley, which is a rivalry game, and that's the beginning of what. And these three South Bend schools coaches have all admitted to me, those are big games because they're rivalry games, and I know there is no city trophy, but they all can walk around for 365 days and say, guess what? We're city champs. That's a big deal. And I think that's what kind of motivates Jay Johnson a little bit to say, hey, yeah, we're not the Penns. We're not the Elkharts. We're not the St. Joe's of the conference. But by golly, we're going to beat Riley and Adams. We're going to win that trophy. And I think that's how he approaches his team week in and week out, which gives them that motivation they need to go out there and put it on the line for the West Side.
For those interested, Adams won the trophy last year. They beat both Riley and Washington.
And I've heard about that every week from certain people at Adams and for people who don't know, I am an Adams alum, and I root for Adams, but I'm also an employee of South Bend Schools, and I want to see all the South Bend schools do well.
Right.
Last but not least, we'll look at the Mishawaka Marian Knights. Really tough season last season, 4-8 overall, but 1-6 in the conference. They did lose in the sectionals to Knox, 48-18, who Knox just ran over everybody. If you want to listen, I had the INSC preview last week. Knox ran over everybody. but Marian scored 262 points, 21.8 points per game. They gave up 350 points, 29.2 points per game. So defense was a challenge for them. You look at last season's schedule, start out with a loss to Mishawaka 35-7. They then beat Culver Academy 21-14. They beat Adams 21-0 before they just go on a losing streak. 31-0 in the Holy War, 54-14 against Penn, 28-21 Washington, 34-30 New Prairie, 59-14 Elkhart, 25-17 Riley. You then get to sectionals. They beat River Forest 56-14. They beat Calumet Tech 43-8. So they get to the sectional championship where they then lose to Knox 48-18. But you're talking about a team that went into sectionals with 2 wins. They then matched their amount of wins in sectionals. So it was an up and down season, you could say, for Mishawaka Marian. But it's a season that they definitely probably expected. They didn't expect to get blanked in the Holy War. That is never an expectation. You are expected to win that no matter what you bring into the Holy War. But I think this season, you look at it, they're at home against Mishawaka, at Culver, at Adams. They get St. Joe at home, at Penn. They have Washington and New Prairie at home. They're at Elkhart. They get Riley at home. They bring back nothing offensively. I mean, they lose both their quarterbacks. They lose... I shouldn't say nothing. They lose both their quarterbacks. They have to figure out quarterback. They bring back their top ball carrier in Gruber, 225 carries, 1,020 yards, 11 touchdowns. They bring back a couple wide receivers. They lose about half their offensive production, half their points. Defensively, they lose half their top tacklers. So they're bringing back pretty much half their team other than the quarterbacks.
And a brand new head coach.
A brand new head coach. So it'll be an interesting season, to say the least, I think, for Marian. What do you guys think? Obviously, you'll see them October 2nd, Kenny.
Yep.
I think... Well, I really don't know what to think with Marian. I'll be honest.
I really think that they're kind of a wild card in this mix. You've got Coach Caldroni, who's coming in there. You know, Coach Davidson, very successful at Marian. Decided to hang up his whistle after last season. And yeah, they're kind of unknown. You know, everybody's going to talk about Penn. They're going to talk about St. Joe. They're going to talk about Elkhart. But where does Marian fit into this? They've had so much postseason success over recent years. Again, a losing record last year that gets to the sectional title game. I think there's a lot of unknowns. You've got a new head coach. You don't know exactly what he's going to do. How are you going to utilize Gruber? What are you going to do with the starting quarterback? What are you going to do with other positions? They're kind of that unknown that, and I'm sure Coach Caldroni is probably happy. Nobody's talking about us. We're just going to come out on Friday night. We're going to slap you in the mouth, and let's see you adjust, because nobody's talking about the Marian Knights for 2026.
Well, I think two guys, when you look back at them getting to the final last year, the schedule they played in the regular season most definitely helped them get to the final game against Knox. Unfortunately, there was a young man by the name of Miles McLaughlin that was Knox's Mr. Everything and proved why in that sectional final down at Community Field. But you look at Marian, and I agree, John. I don't know what to expect from Marian this year. I mean, we don't know. We don't have any idea what to expect. You know, and I'm sure that Joe Caldroni and his staff in the offseason have been spending just about every moment of practice time trying to teach their guys how to defend the option. And that's one advantage I think Marian should have every year if they open the year with Mishawaka, in that they could devote a lot of their practice time to trying to slow that offense down, because they're only going to see it one time the whole year. Because you look at the rest of their schedule, there's nobody on their schedule that runs Mishawaka's offense, that triple option.
Not at all.
So he could really, you know, Coach Caldroni can really devote the offseason and fall camp to just teach his guys, hey, this is what you got to do to try to slow down Mishawaka's options. You're not going to stop it completely, but if you stop it enough, you give yourself an opportunity to win the ball game.
I think with Marian not knowing what they are, the biggest question they're going to have is who is your quarterback going to be?
Yeah.
Because, and when I say they lose their quarterbacks, they lose 99% of their passes, 149 out of 150. They had 2 quarterbacks last year, both were seniors. They lose 92% of their yards, 955 out of 1033. The one pass they don't lose was because it was a trick play wide receiver pass. The wide receiver's coming back. So the one pass that they don't lose wasn't even quarterback throwing the ball. And they lose 6 to 7 touchdowns. Again, it wasn't the quarterback who threw the touchdown. So they have no quarterback coming back. So they're going to have a brand new starting quarterback with no varsity experience unless they get a transfer. Again, school of choice issues. However you want to see it, positive or negative. You look at their backfield, they bring back Gruber, who is big, but they lose 38% of carries, 46% of yards, 54% of touchdowns. They lose half their receptions, half their receiving yards, but only 2 touchdowns. So offensively, they lose half their offense, half their points. Their offense is going to be suspect because no one knows what they're going to do at quarterback. And that is high school, college, pro, semi-pro, pee-wee. What you do at quarterback is how your team is going to go. If you have a good quarterback, usually you're going to have a decent team, I would say. So Marian's quarterback situation, I think, is the biggest question mark I have with this conference. Because you look at how Marian did last year. Yes, they gave up a lot of points. Young team defensively. 31-0. St. Joe can't have that. You have a brand new coach coming in. He's going to fix the defense. I'm pretty sure he is a defensive coach. So he's coming in. He's going to fix the defense. You have the Mishawaka right out of the gate. You start practicing the option probably in December. Just, hey, here are your keys. Here's what you read. You kind of rep it a little bit in the summer. Come fall camp, that's all you're repping. With this conference, you have Penn, you have Elkhart, you have St. Joe. Let's be honest, who's the 4th team? Because we'll get into this when we go over our predictions, but you kind of have tiers here. And the 4th spot is kind of up for grabs, and you play the game on Friday nights. The Holy War, if Marian can win that, all of a sudden, can they be the 3rd team? If they can figure out a way to beat Elkhart at Elkhart, when you get Elkhart coming off of a tough game, let me go back here. You do get Elkhart coming off a game against Penn. So, however that game goes, Elkhart-Penn, Marian follows right after. All of a sudden, if you can get those 2 games with that situation, you're looking like, hey, 2nd in conference potentially. So that quarterback situation for Marian is my biggest question mark in this whole conference. I'll be honest.
Well, I think, guys, it's a 3-horse race right now. Penn, I think, is head and shoulders above everybody else. I think St. Joe slides into the 2 spot, and then 3 through 7 or 3 through 8, it's anybody's guess as to who could be in that spot. I think, and this is no knock, it's just being real. I think 3, 4, and 5, it's going to be a battle between Marian, Elkhart, and New Prairie. I think for those 3 spots, and you can't discount Adams too.
No.
So I think 3 through 6, it's those teams that are kind of jumbled in there. And
well, before we get too far into this, let me play our last commercial break. Then we'll come back right to you, and we'll get our conference predictions.
Sure.
So come right back here on the 574 Sports Report.
Want to taste of Chicago? Well, bring it on down to Digsy Dogs and Grill with locations in Hudson Lake. Make sure to try their Chicago dog and their Italian beef, plus much, much more. Have a sweet tooth? Check out the large selection of ice cream products, including shakes and more. Digsy Dogs is located at 8310 700 North in Hudson Lake and is open 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. That's Digsy Dogs and Grill.
Back here on 574 Sports Report. And like I said, Kenny, we'll lead right in with you. You already kind of talked a little bit about it, but conference predictions, I think all of us can agree. Penn's 1, 2, and 3 is where we start to disagree, but it sounds like you kind of agree with me where there are tiers to this conference, and if, one win can muddle up which tier a team is in.
Yeah, like I said, it's Penn's to lose at this point. I think St. Joe is number 2. Then 3 through 6 is kind of muddled, but I would give the edge to Elkhart in the 3 spot. And then 4 through 7, you're looking at any combination of New Prairie, Adams, Marian, Riley in those 4 through 7 spots. And I'm not being mean when I say this, but I think it's Penn at the top, Washington at the bottom, and then 2 through 7, you have a pretty good idea who you think it's going to be at 2 and 3, but then 4 through 7, it could be any combination of the remaining teams.
John, I'll pass it over to you for your conference predictions.
Well, until somebody can show me that Penn is beatable, Penn will probably win the conference. I will slide St. Joe into number 2. I just think that their defense is going to lead them this year. I think the experience that they have back coming from the defense, and I think helping with having both quarterbacks on the offense, I think St. Joe's 2. I'll slide Elkhart 3rd. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Elkhart doesn't finish as runner-up, but I think St. Joe will beat them, and that'll put them in 2. Number 4 is interesting. I'm going to slide Adams in the number 4 slot. I really think Frank's got some good pieces that they need to work on, but I really think the way their schedule falls, I think Adams slides in the 4th spot. I put New Prairie 5th. Then I would obviously, put Marian 6th, Riley 7th, and Washington 8th. I think there's just too much uncertainty with Marian. Now, Marian can finish in that middle tier, but I think there's just too many unanswered questions for Marian. And I just don't know if I can put them in that middle tier quite yet.
Well, for me, and I said this already, the tiers is what I see. I see Penn, cream of the crop, top of the list, top of the conference. Until someone knocks them off, they're staying there. Simple as that. Second tier, I have on a good day can win. So I have St. Joe and Elkhart in that tier because if they get Penn on a good day, Elkhart offensively, I think Elkhart can come out and win that game and win the conference. I think St. Joe at the end of the season, it just takes one game. One game at the end of the season, that's what it takes. They can win the conference. Like both of you, 4 through 6 is what I kind of have here. I have Adams, I have Marian, and then I'll go 4 through 7. New Prairie and Riley intrigued me because we don't know what Riley has because we don't have stats. We do know New Prairie loses a lot, and they're kind of rebuilding. So New Prairie, Riley sit 6 and 7 with me because of the unknown and the known of what New Prairie is losing. So 4 and 5, all of a sudden, Adams and Marian. And as I said with the Marian preview, that quarterback situation is my biggest question mark because you don't know what they have. I'm going to agree. I have Adams 4. I'm going to put Marian 5, which going from 8 to 5 is a huge jump in the conference, no matter what. At 8 to 4, 8 to 5 in a jump in this conference, when you have 1, 2, and 3 that top heavy is huge. I'm going to put New Prairie 6, Riley 7, just because we don't know what Riley has. I think it's going to be another tough year on the west side for Washington, just because they lose Lineberry. They need to figure out wide receiver. They lose their leader on defense. So it's going to be another tough year on the west side for sure. But any given day, St. Joe Elkhart wouldn't surprise me if they upset Penn. Like I said when we did the Elkhart preview, I think they could shock people because they get St. Joe at St. Joe. But that was a 21-14 game last year. That was a hard-fought victory for St. Joe. That's when people said, wow, St. Joe could be for real this year. Could Elkhart flip that script this year and people will be like, wow, Elkhart could be for real this year? So that's the intriguing part to me. So people, if you don't have, a team you root for or anything, that September 25th game at St. Joe against Elkhart, that might be a game to kind of keep an eye on because Elkhart has St. Joe and Penn back-to-back. If Elkhart beats St. Joe, that Penn game all of a sudden becomes for conference. So if Elkhart beats St. Joe, they're riding high and they realize what they have in front of them. Kind of similar to what I kind of look at how long ago was it? 5 years ago? Obviously, Kenny will know this. 5 or 6 years ago, when New Prairie was going on their run, they had the game right before Penn where they're like, we just won this. If we win next week, it's our conference.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see Elkhart that same way where if they beat St. Joe, it's like we have everything in front of us. All we have to do is this. And what did New Prairie go out and do? They beat Penn, and they won the conference.
You're talking 2020. You're talking 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I'm thinking they win the
5 years ago. I was right.
Yeah, I think so.
Let me go back. Let me go back and look here to make sure my facts are correct here.
But that, to me, is a huge game because if Elkhart can ride that momentum.
Actually, Drew, New Prairie did not win the conference in 2021. That was the year they got beat by Marian 33-0 and Amzie Miller.
Oh,
yes, and they ended up losing to Elkhart the following week, so they didn't win the conference in 21.
Well, that just threw everything out. Nonetheless, if Elkhart beats St. Joe, watch out.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that is the NIC preview. Kind of taking a look ahead. Next week, I will have the NLC preview. So that'll come out again on Wednesday. It'll be one of those things where I think this went well, guys. This kind of version.
Oh.
If you guys would like to hop on the NLC, you can. I know we did this because of the NIC. Kenny, you're the voice of New Prairie. We saw a couple NIC games with St. Joe and Penn and all that. We'll obviously talk about that, but I did this on the INSC preview. I think the NLC is a two-horse race with Mishawaka Concord. Warsaw had a bunch of seniors. They lost the seniors. Don't know what they'll have. Northridge has a brand new coach. Northwood is kind of in a transitional period where they had a really good team, kind of like New Prairie is. They're just a little farther along. Their freshmen are now sophomore juniors, so they're transitioning a little forward ahead. So I think Mishawaka Concord and the NLC is a horse race.
And we'll don't forget, we'll preview the Logansport Berries next week as well.
Yes.
Even though they're not in the NLC, they are one of the teams that we are starting to cover on a more regular basis. And We have a couple of sponsors for them as well. So we'll talk about the Berries next week, which is going to be very intriguing. I've had some conversations, and I'm going to try to work this out, Drew. We may have Troy Hudson join us next week, the head coach of the Berries. May join us next week. Still trying to work that out.
Okay.
We'll see.
So, Kenny, your thoughts on the NLC with just the very knowledge you know?
Yeah, it's like you were saying. I think it's Mishawaka, Concord, and then of course you never discount Bart. Never discount Bart.
I truly understand
We're still
that.
campaigning for King Gyros in Warsaw.
That's right. Well, when he gets ready to retire, he can take the grandkids there, and they can have good times with Gramps. No, you look at that; it's still Mishawaka, Concord, Warsaw. I still think at the top level. Northridge, Northwood in the middle, and then it's Goshen, Wawasee, and Plymouth. And guys, we talked earlier about football traditions at South Bend, Washington. I'm just really stunned at what's going on down in Plymouth. The turnover, the lack of what I call having a settled program. I mean, when you're making all these changes, especially in places like Plymouth, where they value their athletic programs. I mean, when you're constantly having this turnover, it's hard to build. And right now, the gap between some of these schools and the NLC is just getting bigger and bigger each year because it's right now, Mishawaka and Concord and Warsaw are really leading the pack. And you've got Northridge and Northwood right there. And then after that, it's Goshen, Wawasee, and Plymouth trying to stay out of the basement.
And Plymouth has just kind of been an uproar right now with their coaching staff. They now have a new athletic director. They've got a new football coach, a new baseball coach. It's just kind of a mess in Plymouth right now.
Really, you look at that conference, Goshen, new head coach. Northridge, new head coach. Plymouth, new head coach. Wawasee is either a new head coach or last year was his first year, correct?
Yes.
I believe. Well, either this is his first year or last year was his first. So all of a sudden, half the conference is brand new head coaches.
Yeah,
Mishawaka, very established. Concord, established. Bart, never leaving. And then Northwood, I mean, you have 4 established coaches, 4 brand new or year-old coaches in that conference. But that will be a next week conversation. Gentlemen, I appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah.
Any final words for the folks on the NIC before we wrap it up?
Well, again, a reminder, we'll have a live podcast. We'll do our schedule reveal. That will be, of course, for the new Prairie games as well as our St. Joe County game of the week. We'll do that at Digsy Dogs and Grill. They're in beautiful Hudson Lake. You can come on out, get some great food. And if you are so inclined to come and meet with us, we'll be glad to talk to you. We might even throw you on the air. Who knows? Hopefully we'll get some guests to come out and talk to us that day. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Make sure you like and subscribe. Drew has done a lot of hard work on this podcast, putting this together here for week number 2, and he will for week number 3 as well. So make sure you like and subscribe, as you can see here on the screen. And we would appreciate that. We appreciate every one of you who's listened. And I'll tell you guys, I know I've got a state baseball tournament I've got to do the next few days, but I'm ready for football. Let's get past the baseball. Let's play football.
I will not lie. I don't know if it's because the World Cup has made it worse, but I've truly found myself going back and watching old YouTube. Today I watched the 2012 Notre Dame Michigan game. I need football back in my life.
It's coming.
Well, I'll tell you what, if ESPN wants to really tick off the Notre Dame fans, they've been doing a good job of it. Replaying Alabama games and Miami games and Notre Dame games. But that's another podcast for another day.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is NIC talk, Kenny.
Yeah.
What it boils down to, guys, is we just want football to come back in our lives, and we're starting to do that. So
yes.
And there are advertisers on all of our broadcasts that are ready for football also.
Yes, they are.
Yes. So if nothing else, that will wrap up our podcast. 574 Sports Report. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great week. God bless. We'll see you on the next one, folks. So long.